Well, a little over a week ago, the Washington Post ran an article about a man in Maine who spends his days writing political stories for social media, especially Facebook. The stories put Democrats and liberals in a bad light, and not surprisingly, thousands of conservatives like and share the man's stories across Facebook almost daily. The problem? The stories are all fake, made up, 100% cold cloth fabrications. And even though the man behind the stories posts disclaimers that his material is not true, the liking and sharing continue. So what is going on with a few of our fellow citizens? Well, to try to get a handle on this puzzle, we turn to noted television news analyst and educator Al Tompkins from the Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg, Florida. Al, our thanks for your time, and it's good to see you tonight.
We ought to put some sort of disclaimer on there that it's possible that some of the things I'm going to say are true.
We'll get working on that. Now, look, I recall your point that you make in some of your journalism seminars that, intentionally spreading false information is not new. It's not new with social media. I think you bring up the New York Herald's 1874 false story about a Central Park Zoo escape. So we've been here before, right? So how does this story play out then?
Well, look, even in real life, not even on the online life, the news life, in real life, we tend to repeat things that we believe. We tend to repeat things that are convenient for us. And we tend to discard those things that we don't agree with or aren't good for us. This sort of whole idea of selective recognition of facts is not new. In fact, I would suggest it's probably human nature. It's very difficult for us to pass along things that aren't good for our own belief. It's very challenging, in fact, for us to pass along things that say, boy, I just disagree with this, but this version of the truth really does kind of make sense to me, even though it collides with everything I've always believed. So we just have to realize that the whole idea of challenging ourselves with truth is a difficult thing for us to do. We also, very often, pass along online things that we ourselves have not put through any real examination. And your viewers, I'm sure, grew up the same way that I did. I grew up in the country, and the people that were my mentors, my parents, going up, they said, look, if you don't know if it's true, don't repeat it. Don't repeat rumors. It's even scriptural. Don't rumor with people. And so I would say to you, that's one of the things, is that very often we pass along something that we don't know or have done no reasonable research to find out whether or not it's true. And if we're going to pass it along with our own endorsement to say, look, this is coming from me, it seems to me you have some obligation to have done some sort of research to try to confirm it to be true.
But is this just part of the bargain that you get in a country like this?
Well, there's no doubt, right? Democracy is a messy business. Because all sorts of information, reliable and unreliable, all travel at the same speed. And truthfully, I don't think any of us would want it any other way. If you want order, if you want one version of the story that we're told is reliable, then democracy is not for you. I rather like the idea of self-determination, but self-determination requires some level of self-responsibility. And so we have to accept the messiness of democracy. We also have to accept that there are all kinds of information. I always say that there's basically four kinds of facts, right? One is what I would just call information, just the straight facts of what you've learned. One is called misinformation. That's when I think that I got the facts right, but I may have gotten something wrong. I may have said 12 when it's really 14, or 22 when it was 37. I didn't mean to get it wrong. But somehow or another, I got it wrong. But the most damaging kind of information is what I would call disinformation. Disinformation is synonymous with lie. What I would say to you about disinformation is that generally disinformation is profitable for the person who passes it along. It's good for me politically. It's good for me monetarily. It's good for me because I wanted to cause chaos. I wanted to cause doubt. So disinformation is information that I meant to get wrong, or I reasonably should have known better. It's a lie. It's intentional. And then there's a fourth kind of information that I think gets a bad rap. We call it propaganda. And an awful lot of propaganda isn't necessarily nefarious. That is, I didn't mean to cause you any harm, but I didn't give you all of the facts. A lot of advertising, particularly political advertising, is what I would call propaganda. The facts that are good for me, I'll pass along. The facts that are bad for me, you'll have to go get on your own. So propaganda isn't necessarily mean-spirited. It's just not very inclusive of all those things. So when you look at something, whether it's a news source, whether it's this program, whether it's me, ask yourself, does this person have something to gain or lose by what they're saying? Do they seem to be giving me many sides of the story or only one side of the story? And I always say, Brian, as you well know, the difference between journalism and other sources of information is that through journalism, you're willing to give many sides of the story regardless of whether you personally agree with it or not. I've known you long enough to know that you'd be willing to give voice to something that you don't personally agree with. Color 10, for example, might not profit from me giving that voice, or might not like it. The management, ownership of Color 10 may not like it, but that wouldn't keep you from putting them on the air. And that's what journalism is about. You give voice to things that you might not necessarily agree with. I would say one other thing, though. This last weekend, for example, Sunday, when the story about the global warming study, the national study that came out on Friday, I did notice that a few news programs on Sunday included people who have no scientific background at all. And the problem with that is that we are trying to look like we are open to many sides of a story. We try to say, look, we're looking for all sorts of sides of the story. But that's false balance. The whole idea of giving voice to people who don't know what they're talking about seems to be not to be journalism. Look, if you were doing a story on whether the earth is round or not, I have no real need to have a flat earther come on. The fact of the matter is the earth is round. And it doesn't matter whether you think the earth is flat. It's not. And I don't think that you have any obligation in journalism to give a flat earther a voice. And I think that's one of the things that we have to get over in journalism, is this idea that everybody deserves a voice, because they just don't. Sometimes people don't know what they're talking about. And we ought not put them on the same footing with people who do.
Al Tompkins of the Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg. Al, a pleasure. Thank you so much.
You bet.
And we'll be back after this.